This is whisper from history where forgotten voices rise again. In the history of the world, some events were not merely scenes of blood, but moments that shook the very soul of a nation. Today, we unfold the story of an execution, one that sparked a storm of rebellion among the people. Stay with us until the end, and discover the truth behind this tale. The morning was heavy with silence. A city square, once filled with the hum of daily trade and chatter, now held its breath. Wooden scaffolds stood in the center, grimly decorated with ropes that dangled in the early light. Soldiers lined the streets, their boots pressed hard against the cobblestones, muskets resting coldly at their sides. The air smelled of sawdust and iron, and somewhere within that crowd, ordinary men and women gathered, their eyes fixed on the spectacle that was about to unfold. This was not simply another execution. This was an act that would ignite the embers of anger and fan them into a fire of rebellion. It began, as many tragedies do, with the crushing weight of power. Rulers, anxious to tighten their grip, often believed fear was stronger than loyalty. But fear is a fragile leash. Stretch it too far, and it breaks. The condemned man, or in some tellings, several men, stood chained at the center of the platform. Their crime, not murder, not theft, but defiance. They had dared to stand against authority, to speak words of resistance, to imagine a future not controlled by the throne. The crowd whispered their names in hushed tones. Some spoke with anger, others with reverence. A woman clutched her child's hand tighter, murmuring prayers. A farmer, his hands rough from years of toil, stared with clenched jaw. These were not just criminals. They were symbols, and the rulers knew it, which is why they had chosen the most public of punishments. Let the people see what happens to those who resist. Let the blood serve as a warning. But what the rulers could not see was how that very blood would become the seed of rebellion. The executioner stepped forward, face hidden beneath a black hood. His hands, steady from years of grim service, adjusted the rope. The condemned lifted his head, eyes sweeping across the faces in the crowd. He saw mothers, fathers, workers, soldiers. He saw fear, but also something else, a spark. When his voice finally broke the silence, it carried across the square like thunder. He did not plead for mercy. He did not curse his captors. Instead, he spoke of justice, of freedom, of a time when no man would bow to tyranny. Today, you take my life, he said. But tomorrow, it will be yours that trembles. The crowd gasped. The soldiers shifted nervously, and the ruler, watching from behind the safety of palace windows, clenched his fists. Moments later, the trapdoor fell, and silence was replaced by a roar that no gallows could silence. But to understand why this single execution carried such weight, we must step back. The land was already restless. Taxes rose higher each season, draining peasants of their harvest. Armies marched endlessly, fighting wars that brought no glory to the common man, only grief. Laws were written not for justice, but for control. The people had endured until now. For this man was not just any dissenter. He was a son of the soil, a voice among them. He had walked their fields, shared their hardships, and carried their hopes. To kill him was to wound the people themselves, and that wound would not close. In the days that followed, whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into shouts. Taverns echoed with the condemned man's final words. Markets buzzed with outrage. They silenced him. A merchant spat, but they cannot silence all of us. The soldiers patrolling the streets felt the shift. Where once people lowered their gaze in fear, now they met their eyes with quiet defiance. A blacksmith refused to bow when ordered. A farmer spat in the dust as soldiers passed. Something was stirring. But what was truly dangerous for the rulers was not just anger, it was unity. Meetings began in secret, in dimly lit barns, in candlelit back rooms. People gathered, farmers, craftsmen, even disgruntled soldiers. They spoke of injustice. They shared their rage, and they swore that the death of one would not be in vain. His voice was silenced. One man declared, "So ours must grow louder." The rebellion was no longer a dream. It was an inevitability. The first sparks came quietly. A shipment of grain meant for the palace was stolen in the night, redistributed among starving families. Soldiers stationed at outposts found their supplies dwindling, stolen by unseen hands. Posters appeared in marketplaces, scrawled with the same final words of the condemned. "Tomorrow, it will be yours that trembles." The rulers grew nervous. Spies were sent. Punishments became harsher. But with each act of cruelty, resistance grew stronger. And then one night the first shot rang out. It was at a remote garrison. A handful of villagers, emboldened by fury, attacked. The soldiers, caught off guard, were overwhelmed. Muskets were seized, ammunition stolen. By dawn, word spread. The people had struck back. The rebellion had begun. From village to village, flames rose. Peasants armed with scythes and axes clashed with soldiers trained for war. Outnumbered and outmatched, yet fueled by rage, they pressed on. They were not merely fighting for land or food. They were fighting for the memory of the man who had stood on the gallows, who had dared to defy with his last breath. And the rulers? They were unprepared. They had thought fear would hold the people in chains. Instead, fear had turned to fire. But rebellions are never simple. They are messy. They are brutal. And though the people rose with courage, the response from power was merciless. The palace unleashed its army. Villages were burned. Fields were scorched. The rebels faced musket fire, cannons, and cavalry. Families were torn apart. The price of defiance was heavy, yet even in the ashes, rebellion survived. Stories carried from survivor to survivor. The execution that had begun it all was retold in countless versions. Some said the condemned had smiled in his final moment. Others swore the earth shook when the trapdoor fell. In truth, it was not the details that mattered. It was the meaning. The execution had created a martyr. And martyrs never die quietly. Months turned to years. The rebellion rose and fell in waves. Some battles were victories, celebrated in song. Others were massacres, etched in grief. But through it all, the rulers could not restore the old order. The people had tasted resistance, and once tasted, it could never be forgotten. And so, even as the gallows claimed more lives, the rebellion endured. Each execution added fuel to the fire. Each act of cruelty hardened resolve. The rulers may have believed they were writing the final chapter with that execution. Instead, they had written the prologue to something far greater. Looking back now, historians debate the details. Was it the execution of a single man, or a group of dissenters? Were they revolutionaries, soldiers, or ordinary citizens? The records are often clouded, rewritten by victors, or destroyed by the fearful. But one truth is clear. It was not merely the act of killing that sparked rebellion. It was the defiance in the face of death. It was the courage to turn a noose into a weapon, to turn silence into thunder. That moment, when a life was taken, gave birth to a movement that no executioner's hand could ever stop. The square where the scaffold once stood has long since changed. Shops and homes cover the ground. The wood rotted away, the ropes turned to dust. But if you stand there today, and you listen closely, some swear you can still hear it, the echo of a voice that refused to beg, the final words that refused to die. Tomorrow, it will be yours that trembles. And tremble they did. The place where the scaffold once stood, today it is covered with shops and houses. But they say, if you listen closely, you can still hear a voice echoing. Tomorrow, your power will tremble, and tremble it did. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe, and don't forget to explore our Dark Series playlist.